Hello there, I'm Sanj from Inclusive Magic, and you're listening to Koanversation, a podcast about Zen nuggets to free your mind. This is the second episode, and we'll be dealing with the second koan from Mumon's The Gateless Barrier, which you can find on Wikisource. The link's in the show notes. My guest today is a great friend and a very talented creative, Jean Wang, with whom I became good friends on UCLA's screenwriting grad program. He's lived all around the world, worked in games before moving to film, and he's currently working in the writer's room of Charles Yu's interior Chinatown. Jean, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Hello. Good to hear your voice, Sanj.
Yours too. Jean, I'm very excited to have you here because you not only are a really intuitive thinker, and we've had some great conversations, but also I think you'll come at this from two angles that are really interesting. One is storytelling, and your own stories have actually explored some themes from Eastern spirituality, like karma, which is something we're going to talk about in this koan. You've also practiced vipassana and certain forms of meditation. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience with some of that?
Obviously, I do not profess to be any kind of expert in any of these topics, but in the spirit of this sort of practice being open to all people and lay people, I guess if I could refer to myself as a student of Buddhism or meditation, I mean, my approach is it's probably a similar story to a lot of at least East Asian contemporary, I guess, young people of our generation, which is I'm Taiwanese American and most of my family is still in Taiwan. And in Taiwan, the Buddhism there is, it's a very Buddhist country, but the Buddhism there is also, over the years, has become very intertwined with ancestor worship and so many different schools of like Chinese and Japanese schools of thought that it's sort of just, I don't know, it's a little bit like anything goes. And it's, you know, people go to the temples to light incense and pray to their ancestors and pay respects, but also to literally ask for things like straight A's in school.
Sure.
Or, you know, like a bride.
Sure. I'm very familiar with the transactional school of prayer in my my family. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know. For me, that was sort of my first kind of foray into Buddhism, but it wasn't really until college, actually, or uni, as you all call it, at Berkeley, where I don't know why, I just decided, I was fascinated when I heard about this class, like a spirituality meditation class. It was for people who wanted to know more about meditation, and basically, it was an intro to all types of meditation traditions around the world. So there was Christian mysticism, Buddhism, Sufism, and Native American shamanism. And it sort of opened my mind for the first time to the practice of meditation. And I loved it.
I was really impressed to hear about that they had that comparative approach where they were saying across different cultures, these are all very similar traditions, and it shows you how innate something like this is to human existence. And I was very curious, what did you love about it back then?
I think at the time, I just didn't have any experience with, I guess, taking time out of the day to center yourself. I didn't really even think about this concept of there being a self that's not the self that you are every day when you are, you know, at the time studying, being a student, being a son, like just your everyday anxieties. And I never thought about the fact that there was a self that was, I don't know, this sounds silly, but like a primordial self, a self that has always been there, that is underneath all of the self through which you navigate our daily world.
Sure.
I kind of put it aside for like at least a decade or something until a few years back. I was having a little, you know, quarter midlife, whatever, 30, a crisis when you turn 30.
You're too young
as we
for
do.
a midlife crisis, yeah. Let's call it
well,
quarter.
Technically, well, anyway.
Life expectancy is going up, so let's call it quarter life crisis.
It's true. Let's call it that. But I'd been working in tech at the time on educational gaming software, which, you know, I found some purpose in that. But I don't know. I think I was just tired of the whole rat race. And I quit my job. And the first thing I did was this Vipassana course. A month after I left my job, I was at a wedding in London, actually. where I met this wonderful woman. She was this lady who was living in Burma at the time, or Myanmar. And she said, "Oh, you want to do this Vipassana course? Do you know it started in Myanmar? And also, I live there, so you should come do it here and visit me." And that just blew my mind. I was like, what?
Absolutely.
What are the odds? This is obviously the world telling me that, yes, I should just follow what this stranger lady told me to do. So 2 months later, there I was. I flew into Yangon and I did my first 10-day silent Vipassana course. And I've tried to maintain the practice ever since. It's become a pretty important part of my life.
That's incredible, Gene.
Yeah, and I don't know, like, again, I'm not, who am I? I don't know if I'm... Oh, can you hear that siren, by the way?
I can. Or it's the Karma Police.
Coming for
Radiohead.
us. Yeah. The monks in Myanmar are like, I hear him trying to talk about meditation, for which he is not qualified. No.
Well, actually, when you talked about being in Myanmar and... which year were you there?
It was 2017, and it was like a brief window, it felt like, where...
There was democracy.
Yes, there was relative peace and optimism, and all the citizens there were like, the society was opening up, and, everyone had a cell phone, there were no restrictions, and before, the latest series of events of unrest. Do
you remember back in 2007, the Buddhist monks were the ones who took to the streets of Rangoon in defiance in this very powerful kind of civil disobedience? So what a powerful place to go begin your journey with meditation.
Right, absolutely.
So the sort of precursor to Buddhism in that world is Hinduism, and both of these religions have the concept of karma and reincarnation. You explored this in a script called Karma B. I don't know if I can say that word because I ticked a box that says we don't use expletives. So I'm just going to say Karma B ***H. It's a great comedy script. I really liked it. So, development execs out there, hit Gene up. But I think that helps us segue to this koan. But what's your understanding of karma and reincarnation?
There's this idea of karma that everyone kind of jokes around with, which is like, oh, I just heard my ex got hit by a car or whatever, like, ha, karma. Like the kind of popular understanding or the way that we use it. And I think while it is used in jest, but I do feel like it's kind of a slight misrepresentation of how I've come to understand karma in more traditionally. Because I think when you talk about karma in kind of the Buddhist tradition and perhaps in the Hindu tradition, we're looking at it's like looking at geological time, right? Like it's across lifespans. It's what you do in this life you might not feel the repercussions of until your next life, or even after that. It can take lifetimes to make up for the sins of one particularly terrible life of sin. I don't even like using that word sin because I feel like that's very Western, probably doesn't exist in Buddhism.
What's kind of interesting is that there are some Buddhist traditions, and I think potentially Zen, where the concept of you being reincarnated literally over multiple lives is not something they subscribe to, but it's more that you can, like, nirvana is not the escape from literal rebirth, it's more you can achieve that here and now. But I think let's dive into the koan. So
yes.
I will read this, and then 3 years later, you'll emerge with dust over your eyes, and I'll ask your opinion, because it's a long koan. All right, so this is koan number 2 from the Gateless Gate, or the Gateless Barrier. It's called Hyakujo's Fox. Once, when Hyakujo, who was an influential Zen master, delivered some Zen lectures, an old man attended them, unseen by the monks. At the end of each talk, when the monks left, so did he. But one day he remained after they had gone. And Hyakujo asked him, "Who are you?" The old man replied, "I am not a human being, but I was a human being when the Kashapa Buddha," this is one of the 7 ancient Buddhas, "preached in this world. I was a Zen master, and I lived on this mountain. At that time, one of my students asked me whether or not the enlightened man is subject to the law of causation. I answered him, the enlightened man is not subject to the law of causation. For this answer evidencing a clinging to absoluteness, I became a fox for 500 rebirths, and I'm still a fox. Will you save me from this condition with your Zen words and let me get out of a fox's body? Now, may I ask you, is the enlightened man subject to the law of causation? Hyakujo said, the enlightened man is one with the law of causation. At the words of Hyakujo, the old man was enlightened. I am emancipated, he said, paying homage with a deep bow. I am no more a fox, but I have to leave my body and my dwelling place behind this mountain. Please perform my funeral as a monk. Then he disappeared. The next day, Hyakujo gave an order through the chief monk to prepare to attend the funeral of a monk. No one was sick in the infirmary, wondered the monks. What does our teacher mean? After dinner, Hyakujo led the monks out and around the mountain. In a cave with his staff, he poked out the corpse of an old fox and then performed the ceremony of cremation. That evening, Hyakujo gave a talk to the monks and told them this story about the law of causation. Obaku, his student who later became a very influential Zen master in Japan, upon hearing the story, asked Hyakujo, I understand that a long time ago, because a certain person gave a wrong Zen answer, he became a fox for 500 rebirths. Now I want to ask, if some modern master is asked many questions, and he always gives the right answer, what will become of him? Hyakujo said, You come here near me and I will tell you. Obaku went near Hyakujo and slapped the teacher's face with his hand, for he knew this was the answer his teacher intended to give him. Hyakujo clapped his hands and laughed at this discernment. I thought a Persian had a red beard, he said, and now I know a Persian who has a red beard. Let me just ask, what do you make of this?
Can we go back to dogs and moo? No, I'm kidding. Wow, there are so many pieces to this. I don't know, should we break it apart into pieces? Because I feel like it kind of takes this crazy turn at the end too. Mm-hmm. I thought I was following it, and then suddenly it just, goes left, right? But it's so interesting. I think for me, the elephant in the room, and maybe it's just like, who is this Persian? Who is the Persian with the red beard? Like, what? Anyway. Right.
I mean, that's fair. That's fair, because it comes out of nowhere. So when I first read it, I thought, red hair, is this the fox? But then I did some, cheating and read some commentaries and found that it might refer to Bodhidharma, the founder of Zen, because although some sources say he's from South India, others say he was Persian, and he's said to have red hair. Do you know Daruma dolls, those Japanese chunky Russian doll type wooden things?
Oh, I didn't know what they were called, but I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so because they're red primarily, and it's because Bodhidharma is said to have been red-haired. So that might be what it is.
You want to know what I thought it was?
You go for it, yeah.
I was like, oh, he slapped him, and now his face is turning red. And so he's joking about how now his cheeks are red because he's been slapped.
Oh my god, that's brilliant. I like that a lot more. I mean, it could be like a Zen pun. I think you're right about breaking this down. There are sort of maybe 3 turning points here. One is just what happened to this old man and his 500 lives of fox thing, just for saying the wrong thing. Apparently, Hyakujo's answer that somehow liberates the old man, and then the slap and the red beard. So with the fox, it sounds like this idea that the old man he's asked this question. He says, no, if you're enlightened, you transcend. The whole point of enlightenment is that you transcend the cycle of rebirth. So technically, he's not said anything wrong, but it's almost like he's jinxed it because he said, oh yes, the enlightened person has transcended that. I mean, he said not subject to it, but it's like Schrodinger's cat. You can't say whether it's dead or alive, but if you open the box, it's dead. Or it's like Orpheus can't look back and see Eurydice. He just has to trust that she's there. I mean, it kind of seems a bit harsh. What do you take from the old man story?
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? Because I guess in this case, literally, he just answered the question wrong and then was subject to not just 500 years, but 500 lifetimes of punishment. as an animal. And the idea being that, you know, when you are reincarnated as an animal, it's of a, not to put a value on it, but a lower tier, right? Then you're supposed to reincarnate into a human, and then when you're a human, that is then when you can become enlightened. So for someone to reincarnate as an animal, it's sort of like going backwards, right? Like, you don't want that.
Yeah. Yeah, and for it to happen 500 times. But Hyakujo says, the old man says, okay, look, tell me, what was I supposed to answer here? And Hyakujo says, the enlightened man is one with the law of causation. And causation here being cause and effect, karma. Do you feel satisfied by Hyakujo's solution there?
There's something about when the old man said the enlightened man is not subject to the law of causation, right? Like this, the not subject to, there is sort of a negative connotation to that, right? In my head, it implies a sort of pride, a sort of an enlightened man is above the law of causation, almost as if I were enlightened, then, you know, I am now above it all, and things can't happen to me, or I can't face consequences. And maybe it's the way he said that. That just sounded so egregious, because it creates a hierarchy, and it seems to imply that once someone reaches nirvana, you no longer have to play by the same rules as everyone else does, or that you're somehow superior. What do you think? What was your take on it?
My reaction is he felt like a tragic figure, you know. I think he was trying to be helpful, and I don't know if he was being prideful. And you're not suggesting that he was being prideful, but it was that's the implication of the statement. Is it a question of, if you say you're not subject to it, you're then still... Like, if we look at not subject to it versus one with, is one with kind of more like, I'm not defining myself in opposition to something, because if I'm defining myself in opposition to something, then I'm not actually totally enlightened. I haven't given up on all of this world of binaries and stuff. Whereas if I say I'm one with it, I think, as you say, I'm not defining myself as above or below it. I'm just saying I've merged with it. I don't know.
The way I read it is, perhaps he's saying that the enlightened man is at peace with the idea of causation, so that no matter what happens, he accepts that that's the way things work. I think it's the idea of knowing that there is cause and effect, and understanding it and accepting it and trusting in it, and feeling like that's not something to be worried about or scared of.
Even the question, it's a loaded question from the student. It's like, hey, if I'm enlightened, will I be free from karma? And he's saying, yes, you will. And there's some comfort to be taken in, like, oh yes, when I reach that goal, I can shed all of this. And actually, you're right, that's the problem, because there's an attachment there. There's an aversion. You're falling straight into that trap that you ostensibly have moved beyond.
What's fascinating too, though, is after Hyakujo says that to the old man, the koan literally says, and then the old man was enlightened. I am emancipated, he said. And he doesn't have to be a fox anymore. And that is wild, right? Because he just spent, 500 lifetimes trying to understand this. And then suddenly this understanding emancipates him. And that is also fascinating to me, because, like, wait, why is it now so easy then? Like, why do you think he's emancipated now? How is that different than what he had originally?
This is the real rub. This is the great question. It's like, how is it different? Hiro, I might reach out to Jimmy Yu, or Guogu. His commentary about this says that he was clinging on to words and expected that Hyakujo would give him a correct answer, and then basically says Hyakujo's answer was lame. He says, upon hearing such a lame answer, one that threw him off, he experienced an awakening. Because he was so attached to words, this shook him from that. I think what you said rings truer to me. I don't know, I felt this kind of emotional understanding when you said that. All right, this is a good moment to pause and share with you this week's koan song, which is called The Mind That Says Keep Nothing.
I was born 500 times a fox, just for saying the wrong thing. I live 500 lives of fox. Yeah, just to rub it in. Well, I tried to outfox them, but I didn't know who. In the end, it was me I had to outfox. Now I know that thanks to you. You wanna be helpful, you just wanna share. You want it to feel like you were actually there. When a mind that says keep nothing has to pause to take a breath sometime. By the time I'd done round 499, I held no hope it'd be the last time. After a lecture I sidled up to the master and beseeched him set me free. He said, "That's up to you, sir." I said, "In that case, please bury me." His words weren't so helpful, but I do think he cared. He surely could see that this old fox was real scared. That a mind that says keep nothing doesn't pause to take a breath sometime. You never live down this little thing you said. You say something different and they turn your cheek red. Still a mind that says keep nothing has to pause to take a breath sometime. Even a mind that says keep nothing has to pause and take a breath sometime.
Okay, back to the Koanversation where we're talking about Hyakujo's fox.
And that's just part one of this koan, right? Like, even though it's difficult to understand, I feel like I think I kind of understand it. But then what really throws everything for a loop again is, so now his student asks him, I don't know if Obaku's like also trying to ask him a loaded question, but basically it's like, oh yeah, there was this person who answered a question wrong. And so now I'm going to ask you a question and see if you answer it correctly or not, since you are also a Zen master. And it's like, what?
Maybe you'll become a fox, you know?
Right. Is that the implication?
Well, I don't know if he's trying to turn him into a fox, or maybe he's. It does feel very playful, obviously, because he, slaps him. He's trying to be sort of cute or take a liberty or playful, at least. So the way I read Obaku's question and then the answer, the slap, is the premise here is that somebody was punished for saying the wrong thing. And he's like, well, if you do the right thing, what happens? Do you get rewarded? And I think that's a false dichotomy. Punishment is a label. So the idea of right and wrong and punishment and reward is wrong. That's why he thinks Hyakujo is going to slap him. And that's what a teacher gets for saying the quote-unquote right answer, because you have to remember nothing is sacred. It's not punishment, reward, good boy, bad.
I like that, because the slap is just so out of nowhere. And it's interesting, he said this was the answer his teacher intended to give him. So it's not just that he slaps his teacher, it's that he does it because he thinks his teacher was going to slap him for asking that question. And
not for asking that question, but that he thought that that's the answer in terms of what's going to happen when a master says the right answer. Like he gets slapped, which is obviously, it seems ridiculous.
I see what you mean.
And the reason the master would say that's what happens is because he's trying to teach you not to think in terms of right and wrong, punishment reward, because it's a fallacy to think that the old man was punished 500 times for saying the wrong thing and you get rewarded and, emancipated for saying the right thing. If that's what you've taken from the story, Obaku, then you're seeing it in these binaries that are precisely what we're trying to shed as Zen. But, it's very difficult not to take it that way, because the poor guy, it's a pretty harsh punishment, 500 lives of fox.
Right. And the funny thing is, going off of that, I would think that Hyakujo is the one that's going to slap Obaku, right? Being like, oh, you didn't get my lesson, slap. So then why, when Obaku slaps him back, is Hyakujo so happy?
Yeah. Well, I suppose because some students would go up there naively thinking that he's going to give them an answer with words that's going to be profound and help them be good, pious answerers in the future. And that's boring to him. It's like, you've learnt nothing. You must unlearn. So I think he's just surprised by the fact that Obaku showed so much insight.
I'm seeing the story you're laying out here. This could have been a parable where Obaku asks this question. Hyakujo tells him, come here, I'll tell you. Slaps him. And then Obaku's like, whoa, why did you do that? And then Hyakujo explains, right? Well, because you didn't understand, blah, 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 blah. But in this case, because Obaku slaps him, it's actually proof that he does understand. And that is why Hyakujo is so happy.
I think so. That's what I take. And Obaku goes on to become one of the 3 major Japanese Zen masters. So it's a cool early moment for him.
Right, like an early, look, I get it, master. Going back to what we were saying earlier about the law of causation, I feel like that's a factor here too, because they kind of break the law of what's expected here, because I feel like you would not expect a slap from either of them to be the answer to the situation, right? A student asks a question, a master says, come here, I'm going to answer it. My first instinct is not that either of them is going to slap each other. And I almost wonder if the slap, because it's so unexpected, is supposed to show the law of causation is not what you might expect.
I love that. Dude,
I was like, again, oh my God, this is why you follow.
No, this is a master storyteller interpreting this, by the way, because what you're pointing to is that the very structure of the koan at a meta level is conveying the point it's trying to make. That is great. I really do like that. I mean, these are 2 men at the top of their game in this dance of Zen, and they play this out in a way that dramatizes rather than just explains the point that has eluded everybody throughout the story. I love that.
I'm curious why Obaku asks. He could have asked, so if a modern master is asked questions and gives the wrong answer, would the same thing happen to him as happened to the old man? I'm personally just very curious, why he focuses on the right answer. Because, wouldn't you just expect that that's what you want? That you want the master would give the right answer and then everything would be hunky-dory?
It's a great point.
The way he asked the question is so interesting.
You're right. The wrong answer has had one consequence, and you assume that your job is to just avoid the wrong answer and therefore avoid that consequence. So he's stirring the pot by bringing in this idea of the right answer.
In a playful way, but I kind of feel like he's setting him up, right? He's trying to be like, what are you going to say that's not going to turn you into a fox?
Yeah.
And Hyakujo is like, I'm not playing that game. I'm going to slap you.
What's great about this is that it's not all pious and sincere and solemn, right? It's very playful and irreverent. That makes a big difference, because I think something that's meant to help you, that's meant to sort of, I was going to say enrich your life, but I don't know if that's a word, but it'll just maximize your connection to yourself and life, shouldn't be totally solemn and austere and ultra serious. My teacher was Keith, the chocolate shaman in Guatemala, and he used to say, I know a lot of people in England who think meditation has to be very serious and you can't smile.
Wait, can we go back to the chocolate what?
So in 2012, I spent 3 months in Guatemala with this American guy who based himself there. He'd become the cacao shaman. He actually died this year.
Oh, no.
I shot hours of footage of these things. I was going to make a documentary, and I just, for whatever reason, stopped working on it. But now that he's passed away, I want to make a YouTube video as a little tribute to him.
Yeah.
The red beard thing, I still think your slapped face thing is great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm open to alternate interpretations.
Well, and again, I can't take credit for this interpretation, if the red-bearded Persian refers to Bodhidharma, then it may be that he's using that as shorthand for an enlightened person. And so he's saying, I knew, I've heard of this dude Bodhidharma who's meant to be enlightened. I now see an enlightened guy in front of me too.
Yeah. No, I like that. I buy that. Good job,
They talk
Obaku.
in roundabout... Yeah. I mean, start 5 points to Obaku's house. Subtext is such a big part of it, and the way they talk is so metaphorical, Once you get into the headspace of how they talk and express these things, because they're trying to communicate something that can't necessarily be communicated literally a lot of the time. It's quite rich. It's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of what you were saying earlier, people always think that monks are serious and austere, right? But I feel like most Buddhists, whether they be monks or practitioners that you look up their lectures on YouTube or whatever, or the ones that I've met, they're hilarious. They're very funny, because isn't that the whole point, right? Why would you reach a state of quote unquote enlightenment or anything close to it if everything after that is just sorrow and despair, right? Like, the whole point is, I see the way the world works and I'm at peace with it, and so I can laugh at things and know that, not that, because I feel like another misconception of Buddhism is this idea that if you're Buddhist and you accept that terrible things happen, that you are then resigned to it, or that you no longer care. And at least from my understanding, I think it's completely the opposite, right? It's once you accept that the world has terrible things and that you can't control everything, it's not that you then stop caring or stop trying to do good things. It's that acceptance then gives you the strength or resilience to then make choices based on that.
Yeah, you're right. You definitely don't become blind to injustice. You still see it, but I think your response, it's a bit like Stoicism, where you have to focus on what's in your control, and anger is a natural instinctual response to injustice, but if you dwell on the anger, you're just going to operate from a place of a destructive place. And actually, if you pull back and you, as you say, you see things for what they are, maybe you understand the suffering that underlies people's unjust actions, and then you're able to deal with it from a more effective and potentially more empathetic place too.
Right, yeah, then it'll be more effective, perhaps.
Yeah. I thought a Persian had a red beard, and I know Jean Wang is also a red-bearded Persian. This has been an incredibly fun discussion, and I've learned a lot, and I thank you so much for your time and your thought and your good humor, Jean. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and you definitely have to come back on this.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored.
Well, the honor is mine. Well, thanks everybody for listening to this second episode of the Koanversation. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with episode 3. You can now listen to this on Spotify and Apple, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to our Substack at inclusivemagic.substack.com. Take it easy, and we'll see you again for another Koanversation.